From the Free Press, this is Honestly, and I'm Bari Weiss. Congratulations are not usually in order for someone who has been forced into hiding, who has arrest warrants hanging over their head, and whose children are scattered across continents for their safety. But my guest today, María Corina Machado, just won the Nobel Peace Prize, joining the ranks of Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Dalai Lama, to name a few. So congratulations are very much called for. On Friday, the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded their 2025 Peace Prize to the Venezuelan opposition leader for her tireless work promoting democratic rights, describing her as a woman who keeps the flame of democracy burning amidst a growing darkness. She is Venezuela's first ever Nobel Peace Prize winner. Machado's story, as Jonathan Jakubowicz wrote in the Free Press, is a political thriller come to life. A 58-year-old industrial engineer and former member of parliament, she spent the past 2 decades as the most relentless opponent of Hugo Chávez and of his successor, Nicolás Maduro. The thriller came to a head on July 28, 2024. Machado herself was banned from running, accused of every crime, including terrorism. That's when Edmundo González, a stand-in candidate for Machado, stood for election and won. He swept with over 90% of the vote. But Maduro, Venezuela's longtime dictator, claimed victory anyway. He seized power and stands to sit in office until 2031. Since that day, Machado has been living in hiding, her location undisclosed even to her closest allies, as the regime has arrested thousands of her supporters and issued a warrant for her arrest. Machado has been nicknamed Venezuela's Iron Lady, the same moniker once given to Margaret Thatcher, who happens to be Machado's personal hero. She represents what may be the most significant challenge to authoritarian socialism in Latin America, and I could not be more honored to have her on Honestly today. We'll be right back with María Corina Machado. Stay with us.
When it's not always raining, there'll be days like this.
You're welcome. Good luck.
When there's no one complaining, there'll be days like this. My mama told me
this way is way faster.
there'll be days like this.
María Corina Machado, welcome to Honestly.
Thank you.
So I guess congratulations are in order. You just won the Nobel Peace Prize a few days ago, and you probably can't tell us exactly where you were since you're in hiding, something that we'll talk about in this conversation. But can you tell us about the reaction you had when you learned that you won the prize? Who told you? Where were you without revealing your location? And were you surprised?
Well, actually, I was sleeping because I had gone to bed really late, and it was 4:30 in the morning. But I always leave my phones ringing because there might be an emergency for security reasons. But I, not always answer if I don't recognize the number. But somehow I did, and I have to be honest, I did not believe what I was hearing. Perhaps I thought I was dreaming, still dreaming or something, but I'm still processing it. It's something that I was totally unexpected. And as I said at that time, it is a recognition for a whole society that has given everything for freedom. So it's something that has moved us and has injected a lot of energy and hope in our country.
There have been other people that have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize when they have been in hiding or worse. I think about Liu Xiaobo, who was imprisoned by the Chinese Communist Party in 2010 when he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. There was also a man who was in a Nazi concentration camp at the time he was given the award. Or I think about Nargis Mohammadi, imprisoned at Iran when she was awarded the prize. And I don't need to tell you that in the situation of Liu Xiaobo, his story ended tragically. And of course, Mohammadi is still in prison. How do you think about the sort of line of awardees that you are a part of? You're receiving this award, this Nobel Peace Prize award, not while you are in freedom, but while you are in hiding for your life. How do you think about yourself in connection to those other awardees, if at all?
Well, first of all, it is something that's really humbling to be close to leaders that I've admired all my life, that have inspired what I do and what we do. On the other hand, I think the situation in Venezuela has come really to a threshold for freedom. I think that we have come a really long way. It's been an incredible journey, very painful, very dangerous. It has taken the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of Venezuelans. It has expelled from our country a third of our population. Imagine what that means. Imagine what it would mean for your country to lose in a period of 15 years, 1/3 of the population, and that they have to flee because they are oppressed.
Maria, just to put specific numbers on that, how many people have fled Venezuela and how many people remain?
Well, almost 9 million people have fled. And we don't know exactly how many we are right now. I mean, Venezuela is a black box. Let me tell you this, Barry. This is absolute chaos from every perspective. It's a regime that has taken over not only the territory, resources, and institutions by force to have society oppressed and divided. And one thing that is important to understand is this huge migration, which is the largest in the world currently, has been intentional, has been a way to control society and to destabilize the region. So it's cruel. So right now, I think we are in a unique moment in our history. And I like to insist on the fact that the liberation of Venezuela that will take place soon will have huge impact in the region and will carry out waves around the hemisphere and the world for freedom and truth to come out.
Maria, you have the connections and the means to have been one of those 9 million people that could have fled. Why are you still in Venezuela? Why are you choosing to remain in a life living in, you don't look fearful, you look very energetic and full of life and optimism, but living a life where you know that true danger awaits you if you're to show your face in public in your country. Why decide to stay? Why not choose to flee and live in freedom like those 9 million other of your countrymen that have left?
Well, the answer is very easy for me. And I only conceived my life in freedom and in my country and in Venezuela. So I had no option. And let me tell you something. I would do it all over again. This is a kind of journey that gives meaning to your life. And let me tell you something. It's certainly been. There have been moments in which I felt very lonely, tired, and guilty because of what
guilty.
Because of what the suffering I have brought to the people I love most. My children, my parents, my husband, my friends. And it's impressive what they have endured during these years, because it's not only me. It's not only the possibility that they didn't have their mom in moments that were very important for them. I had to take my children out of our country many years ago because their life was in danger. And that was the hardest choice I had to make, because I realized that it was a decisive point in my life. And it has been hard for them.
Can you say a little bit more about that? How did your family, I imagine it's a choice that you and your husband and your children, maybe they're adults, made together. Take us, if you can, a little bit, if it's not too hard, into that family meeting, into those conversations. Because most people, they think about the priorities in their life. It's emotional for me even to ask you this. For most people, it's your children above all, and your family above all. And you have made a different set of choices that I think for many people will feel quite alien, quite foreign. How can you choose an abstract fight for freedom for millions of people over the people, arguably, that you love most in the world? Tell us about how you did that.
It is not abstract at all. It's absolutely tangible. And I've done this first and foremost for them, because I want them to live in a country that they feel proud about. And look, to answer this, I have to go a little back in my own history, because my family taught me that, the responsibility we have towards our country. And my dad always told me, he was a very successful businessman and entrepreneur. He was the most intelligent, generous, and honest person I've ever met. And I am the eldest of 4 daughters, so I wanted to prove to him that he didn't need to have a son.
I am also the oldest of 4 daughters, and I think that there is something to that, to birth order and being the oldest daughter too.
Absolutely. And I always say that all my life I spent holding his hand since I was, the first day I was born until he died. When he died, I was holding his hand. And he was such an example. But he taught me what it means to be responsible for the future of your nation. And I that's something that we discussed in the meals at home. No one in my family thought about the possibility of leaving and forgetting about the destiny of our country. So looking back, I think it comes from my family values and the example I got. And then I have to say that my children have been so supportive. So supportive of me. And they didn't want to go. It was me who pressed them to leave. And I remember the day I have a daughter and then 2 boys. And the boys left first, and she's the eldest, and she decided to stay. She didn't want to leave me alone. And she always said, I'm not leaving you alone. And I was at the National Assembly at that moment, and I was speaking in Congress and about corruption, mafia, narco trafficking, and somehow words stopped coming to my mouth, and I started trembling and thinking, where is she right now? Where is María Corina? She should be driving her car from college to home to her house, and she could be harmed. So I sat down and went back home and told her, you have to go. You have to go. It was perhaps one of the hardest moments in this process.
For people that only began to hear your name over the past few days since you were awarded the prize, I want to back up a little bit to just give them a sense of how long you have been in this fight for your nation, in this fight for freedom, in this fight for a set of values that I consider basic and decent. So you have been in hiding since July of 2024, nearly 14 months, and the Venezuelan government has issued an arrest warrant for you. You haven't been seen in public since then, and your location is undisclosed even to most of your allies. So in order for people to understand how you wound up in this situation, I want to talk about your work. You have been building a democracy movement in Venezuela for more than 20 years. Then, in 2024, in the last presidential election, you were barred from running. And you basically had a stand-in candidate who ran sort of on your behalf. Correct me if I'm wrong in the way I'm characterizing this.
That's true.
Okay. Tell us about that movement that you built over the past 20 years leading up to the 2024 election.
Well, I'm an engineer, industrial engineer, and I wanted to follow the steps of my father. The last thing in my life I wanted to do was politics. I actually didn't have a good opinion of politics and politicians. And when Chavez came to power, it was evident that this would end really bad. He started by dividing society in all access, by all dimensions, rich and poor, black and white, left and right, everything. He needed to create confrontation, divide families, and oppress a whole society. And he moved along in that direction. So we realized that we have to stop that and get citizens organized to defend our values, our rights. And that's why in 2002, we started an NGO, a huge movement that's called Sumate, or Join Us, to channel all these strength and tensions through electoral means. That's how, for the first time, I stepped out of my career and started getting involved into citizenship and movements. It's a very long story, but to some point I realized I could not keep on complaining about politicians if I wasn't able, to at least try it myself. And I decided to run for Congress as an independent. I had no political experience. I had no resources. I had no political party. And actually, my ideas were totally different from what Venezuela had done, always socialism. And I started talking about free markets, rule of law, private property. And everybody said, oh, she is absolutely crazy. She will never get support from a wide majority of our population. But it ended up that we built a new party. And in 2023, when the opposition was divided and the regime was seen as strong and powerful more than ever, we managed to push for a primary process for the upcoming elections, presidential election. And we managed to have that primary organized by citizens without the regime getting involved. And I won. I won by over 90% of the votes. And we had a huge turnout, over 3 million people. Nobody expected that. We ran out of ballots. A lot of people didn't vote because there weren't enough ballots.
So you won by this overwhelming majority. And then what was the regime's next move?
Well, they banned me. They banned me from running.
On what grounds? On what grounds did they ban you?
I've been accused of every single crime in Venezuela laws. But in this case, I think it was terrorism or something like that.
Terrorism?
Whatever. Oh, yes. I've been accused of every crime you can imagine. Murder, theft, everything. And well, previously, the regime had signed an agreement with the U.S. government in 2023 that they were going to allow whoever won the primaries to participate in the election. And they violated that agreement. Mm-hmm. So we found ourselves in January 2024 without a candidate. And we found a great Venezuelan citizen called Edmundo González Urrutia. Nobody knew him. He's a diplomat. He's 74 years old. He had never been involved in politics, but it was the only way the regime would accept another candidate.
So how did you convince him to be your surrogate?
Well, I'm going to write that one day in my memoirs because it's an amazing story. And I always ask him, do you regret it? His son-in-law is in prison since January. His family has been persecuted. He was forced into exile in September of last year. So it has been hard on him. But he's a man of values, some strength. So I think he's also grateful to God and life that we've had the opportunity to serve as you're doing right now. But it was amazing because I had only 2 months, Barry, to go around the country to make people understand that those that supported me should vote for him. And I went with this picture in my hand in a poster. And I stood in front of tens of thousands of people saying, it's him. It's not me. It's him. And we didn't have money. No one in the media dared to interview me. You know how much we spent in publicity? 0. This is going to be a case study. 0. We didn't have money to print anything. So people made their own posters and came out with their, messages, many of which I could not, repeat in because of the ratings. So it was something that turned into a real civic movement. I would say even a cultural movement, much beyond than a political experience. It turned into an existential one, and we united a country. We tear down the barriers the regime had built, and we united a country around, values, dignity, freedom, justice, responsibility, and one huge aspiration, desire. We want our kids back home. We want our children back home. So this is so powerful that the regime underestimated us. And we were able to create a legion of more than 1 million volunteers. We couldn't pay anyone to organize in order to overcome a fraudulent process. Absolutely, illegal, extreme, unfair. But we won, and we proved it by a landslide. We won with 70% of the votes.
Okay, so I want to get to that. And just for people that are new to you, I want you to Google her name right now and look at the images of this. How tall are you?
Oh, in meters?
Very
1.7.
Right, let's just say a very petite woman standing kind of roaring like a lion in front of these crowds, and together with, a man in his mid-70s took on a dictatorship supported by millions and millions of your fellow citizens. So the election comes on July 28th of 2024. Maduro's regime announced that they had won. But what your opposition coalition did was something extraordinary. You collected the actual voting receipts, the tally sheets from something like 80% of the country's voting machines. And lots of independent outlets studied those results. The Washington Post reviewed more than 23,000 of those precinct-level results. And you won in a landslide. Some observers called it the largest electoral fraud in recent Latin American history. The fraud being, of course, that the regime claimed that they won. Take us back, if you can, to that day. First of all, to the knowledge of the truth, which was your overwhelming victory, but then the inability to actually take power and win, to have that victory stolen not just from you, but from the people of Venezuela.
Look, I've heard so many times that it's impossible to achieve our goals. And I was told so many times that I was crazy to accept to participate under those conditions because it was impossible to win and even more impossible to prove it. And I knew that. I knew how difficult it was because, as I said before, I had been working in Sumate, this NGO dedicated to election integrity. So we understood that we had to create something unprecedented, that the regime didn't see coming. we had to have at least 20 to 30 people in every polling station, trained, communicated. We had to collect the original tally sheets, and we had to be able to digitize them and show them to the world immediately. That required, huge coordination and organization, because we are in a country in which 60% of Venezuelan territory doesn't have access to the internet. And the power goes out. And if the regime knew we were doing this, we will end up all people involved in prison. So we were able to bring into our country Starlink antennas, scanners, laptops, phones. We located over 150 places absolutely underground. No one knew where they were located, where these original tally sheets would be collected. And in less than 24 hours after the election, we had 75% of the tally sheets. 3 days afterwards, over 85%. And as you say, the whole world were able to see them scanned. And it is a matter of, of truth, of exposing the truth. So this turned, this national effort turned into, a global affirmation about the truth. Not only that, months afterwards, we were able to carry them physically out of the country. Of course, the regime doesn't know when or how or where we took them out. And now they are in the central bank of Panama. And that's popular sovereignty.
But people in the free world, we know that you won. We know that through your surrogate, you won and that your movement won. But we are 14 months out from that election. Since then, Maduro's regime has arrested at least 2,000 people. Probably the numbers are much higher, many of whom were your supporters, people who worked on your campaign, people who helped collect those voting receipts, people who showed up without wearing masks to your protests. And open support for opposition to Maduro has declined since the election. And he's now going to be in office until 2031. And, I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, that disappointment has set in. You said to The Atlantic right after the election that regardless of the Maduro actually coming to power, you said that because of your victory, even though you were not able to actually seize power, that Venezuela has changed forever and for the good. Has your view changed over the past 14 months? Because this Maduro is now in power until 2031. Your supporters are getting arrested. How do you maintain hope, and how do you give hope to your supporters and to ordinary Venezuelans who gave their all to this campaign and who now are still languishing under the Maduro regime?
Well, let me tell you something. Maduro and his regime are weaker than ever. And his time is up. And he's going to be out of power soon. I am convinced of that. And Venezuela has certainly changed a lot in the last 14 months. First of all, Maduro lost totally all legitimacy. But not only that, unleashing that brutal repression campaign, look, Bari, they even went into the houses of young Venezuelans that had the only thing they had done was, being there and protecting intelligence. If they didn't find them, sometimes they took away and imprisoned their family members, grandparents, brothers, sisters. They marked the doors of the houses of those that had been involved in the process. I mean, this has been, they torture. They have killed people in prison. Tens of thousands have been forced to go underground or leave the country. But they thought they would weaken our movement. On the contrary, they gave us more reasons and more urgency. And, that incredible organization that we created to defeat Maduro when they told us it was impossible is the kind of organization we have been building in these months when they tell us it is impossible to have a transition to democracy now. And that's precisely what we will have.
Maria, I want to talk a little bit about the broader context here, which is, of course, socialism and what socialism did to Venezuela. Venezuela, it's going to be very hard for younger listeners to understand this, but it was one of the wealthiest countries in the world at the start of the 20th century. By the time you began your political activism, your country was in economic freefall. Just a few data points for people that are paying less attention to this issue. The GDP in Venezuela is contracted by 70%. There is hyperinflation. There is mass hunger. The situation in hospitals and in terms of medical care is beyond the third world. People can go and look up just the absolute immiseration. It has one of the highest crime rates in the world. 86% of people in Venezuela live in poverty. And as we've been talking about, nearly 9 million people have fled the country. That is more people than have fled Syria and Ukraine. I want you to talk just a little bit about socialism and how socialism destroyed Venezuela, because a lot of people and a lot of young people, let's just say in the West, in America, hear socialism and they think Scandinavia. They think universal health care, good schools, social safety net. They certainly don't think of Venezuela. And I want you to explain to them the effects that socialism has had on your nation.
Look, I have to be honest, we've only known socialism in Venezuela, but Chavez brought it to another level. And at the end, socialism is sexy in terms of its offer, because it tells you we will always be equal. Equally poor, equally dependent. Socialism wants to take away your capacity to make choices and give that to the state. And at the end, the way they can control a society is with misery. And when people rebel to that, then comes violence. And it always ends the same way. We, Venezuelans, 26 years ago, were warned and said, look, Chavez will turn Venezuela through socialism and communism into Cuba. And we say, oh, no way. We have a tradition of democracy. We have a vibrant middle class. This is not going to happen. And look, today we're even worse than Cuba. So now I try to warn societies all around the world, because when you lose freedom, it's so hard to conquer it back. So at the end, the goal of an open society is to have people that live with dignity. And in order to have dignity, you have to be autonomous as an individual. And that's precisely what socialism takes away.
But the appeal of a lot of young socialists, they call themselves democratic socialists here in America, is we are offering you dignity. Socialism will offer you dignity because it is undignified to live in not poverty in the way Venezuela has poverty, but it's undignified to live with such wealth inequality. It's undignified to not be able to pay for health care. Therefore, vote for us. And I'm echoing the campaign appeal of someone like Zohran Mamdani, who is poised to be the next mayor of New York City. When you see the rise of young democratic socialists, and again, you may disagree with whether or not they're democratic, does that alarm you? How do you understand that phenomenon and why it's having appeal in America right now?
Well, it certainly warns me, because we've heard it here over and over again, and we have seen the end of it. Nonetheless, I think in the United States there's such respect for merit, individual merit, such respect for independent institutions and individual choices, that I believe that these these movements will have, this cultural real barrier that will make things clear for the American people. I am certainly concerned because at the end, it always ends the same way. I mean, you have to create the right incentives in a society for people to have, strong efforts, to work hard, to be productive, and the only way you can do that is in a free society. And when market works, and I believe market is the strongest cooperation system that has been created so far, and that's when you can have a whole society moving upwards as open societies permit.
One of the other ideological movements that's getting a lot of traction here in America right now on the left as well as the right is isolationism. The idea that what goes on outside of America's borders is really not of interest to us. And in fact, American involvement in lots of places in the world, especially in the 21st century, has not redounded to our benefit. Why should ordinary Americans who don't think that much about Venezuela care about you and your movement for freedom and democracy there and your fight against Maduro?
Well, first and foremost, the United States is the strongest economy in the world because what it represents for globally in terms of its currency, in terms of its market, in terms of its influence, in terms of its values. Nonetheless, I understand that there are some experiences that have been very costly in terms of American lives and resources that there are reasons to criticize. In the case of Venezuela, this is a very different story because we are part of the same region. I mean, Caracas is 3 hours away from Miami, and that's why these enemies of democracy and enemies of the United States, in the first place, decided to get involved and take over Venezuelan territory, institutions, and resources. Venezuela has been turned into the criminal hub of the Americas, in which Iranian, Chinese, Russian agents are absolutely active, as well as terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the drug cartels, the guerrilla groups that come from abroad. And they are doing this not only to have access to our resources, but because also of the geographic situation of Venezuela, which is strategic. Venezuela has turned into the main channel of cocaine for the world by as we report, a 2020 report by the FBI, 24% of global trade of cocaine goes through Venezuela. But not only that, as I said, the regime wants to destabilize the whole region and have created these criminal networks that are installed and are committing crimes from Canada to Argentina, including the United States. So this has turned into a national security issue for the United States of America, clearly. And when you see on the other hand, what it represents, a transition to democracy to Venezuela, it's huge, not only from a security perspective, to have a real democratic ally, security ally that creates a shield in the heart of the Americas where we are located, to dismantle these criminal structures, to expel the Iranian, Russian agents and terrorist groups from our territory, but also from, an energy perspective, what Venezuela means in terms into an energy hub of the Americas. There's no other country that has the resources and potential Venezuela has.
So,
and one other reason that I think that will have enormous impact is the migrant crisis that you mentioned. Believe me, the day Maduro goes, and he will go, you will see hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans in our diaspora coming back from all over the world, including the United States. And this is huge. This is going to have great consequences in the region. And I'm convinced that once this regime ends up falling, we will see Cuba, the regime in Cuba, and the regime in Nicaragua falling as well, because today Maduro and the resources that come from Venezuela are one of the main supports this regime get.
There were widespread reports that the Trump administration wanted to force Maduro out, not by direct regime change, but basically by saying that the U.S. is engaged in formal armed conflict with drug cartels, labeling them as terrorist organizations, and therefore giving the administration license to take out drug-carrying boats and put a bounty on Maduro's head and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Without saying whether or not that was actually the plan, what do you make of that approach? Do you think that that is a smart strategy?
Well, I have to say a few things first. This is not regime change because the change of the regime was already mandated by the people a year ago. So this is not about, an international movement to remove a legitimate president. This is not the case. Maduro is not a legitimate president of Venezuela. He is the head of a narco-terrorist cartel. That is true. And that is killing not only Venezuelan people, but also American people and people from other countries intentionally. This is what's happening in Venezuela. Is not like other countries, Mexico or whatever, in which you see the cartels infiltrating certain institutions of government. This is not the case. What's happening in Venezuela is the cartel, the drug cartel, is in power, has taken over everything. Our institutions, our resources, our territory, ports, airports, the military, planes. It's all under the control and power of the cartel. This has never, ever happened here in our hemisphere before. So we have been during years, Barry, demanding the international community to understand that Maduro is not a conventional dictator, that this is a criminal terrorist structure that is destroying purposely our society, our population. And finally, we're seeing that the United States is taking a law enforcement approach, which is correct. Why? Because these systems stay in power and are supported by the flows they get from criminal activities, not only drug trafficking, gold smuggling, arms smuggling, human trafficking, the black market of oil. That's, all those.
So, Maria, do you support this effort by the Trump administration?
To dismantle the criminal narco-terrorist cartel? Yes, absolutely, I do.
And do you think if it was pursued aggressively, it could actually lead to Maduro's downfall?
I have no doubt that Maduro is going to leave. As I said before, the cracks and fractures within the regime are growing as we speak. Every day, the very few that still support him, the top brass or the financial enablers that are doing obscene amount of money with the hunger of Venezuela, start to realize that it's over. And we offered Maduro from day one, when we won the election, the possibility of a negotiated transition. And he refused and decided, as we mentioned, to go with all force and brutal repression against the people. Now Maduro still has the chance to live peacefully. How long? We don't know. But he is the one responsible for what's going on. He declared a war against the Venezuelan people and against the international community. It was his decision. So now we had to come to this point because, as I said, I've repeated this many times, to have peace, you need freedom. in order to have freedom, you do need to have strength and more when you are facing a narco-terrorist organization, which is the case in Venezuela.
You dedicated your Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. I want you to explain why.
I dedicated this prize to the people of Venezuela and to President Trump because I think he deserves it. I think it's fair. He's the main supporter of this fight against this narco-terrorist cartel. And also because we've seen in these last months impressive results in terms of conflicts that were stopped or solved. As we speak, we see what's going on in the conflict in Gaza, which goes beyond Gaza and will impact all the Middle East. I think these are incredible achievements, and I think it is fair. And I understand a lot of people will not understand what I said, but I speak with the truth, and I believe this is the truth, and I believe the Venezuelan people share my position heartfully.
Maria,
heartfully.
You've been called the Iron Lady, which is, of course, the same nickname as Margaret Thatcher, who you've called your personal hero. Why is she your hero?
I've admired Margaret Thatcher all my life. And I could relate to her in different moments of my life, feeling that I was swimming against the tide. And so many times I heard people say it was impossible for me to achieve my dreams and goals because I was a woman, because I was not a socialist, because my family had, resources, because I had never been involved in politics, because I usually speak out about what I feel and what I think, even if it's not politically correct. So I related to her. But today, I think it's so different. There are so many people that I admire, and I've tried to make my own speech, my own way, my own style, my own character, and I understand it's to stick to the truth, Barry, can be very costly in many ways. Sometimes it's so much easier to shut up and remain silent. But at the end, look where we are. We've come such a long way. We're so close to freedom. And this has been a battle between truth and falsehood, between freedom and oppression, between life and death. And you cannot stand or want to stand in the middle. You cannot be indifferent when these are, when this is at stake. And that's a reality in Venezuela. That's why I insist it is an existential fight. And it is a spiritual fight as well.
Congratulations on this well-deserved honor. And thank you so much for making the time. And we're thinking about you.
Thank you. I'm honored.